Hello and welcome to the show. Now, recently I did a list of the top 10 best value for money cars, and at the top was the Ultima GTR. And let's face it, it doesn't really have a huge amount of competition. For 130,000 credits, you can get a car with 720 horsepower. It weighs less than 2,200 pounds. That is ridiculous power to weight ratio. 0 to 60 time, under 3 seconds. It'll go on to a top speed of 230 miles an hour plus. And you can still drive it around a track relatively sensible. It handles pretty well. All for 130,000 credits. That is incredible value for money. And certainly, if you're going to be buying a car straight from the Forza garage, you cannot go faster for less. But here is the question: can I build a car for less money to go quicker than the Ultima GTR? That was the challenge that I was set. To start with, though, I went to do a benchmark for the Ultima. I chose the Lime Rock track for the first part of this test because it is a very, very technical track, this one. I'm using the full alternate layout, so it's got both of the chicanes in it. It's a very much a handling track. Now, I should like the Lime Rock track. It's my kind of circuit. In fact, it's essentially Iberian in reverse. Or Iberian was Lime Rock in reverse. Yeah, that's probably the right way of putting it. It should be my sort of track. However, I do struggle a little bit. The first couple of corners I'm terrible at. I just can't wrap my brain around them at the moment. I'm sure I will get better at Lime Rock as time goes on, but yeah, I have been struggling a little bit with this track. I do like the layout with the chicanes, though. The chicanes are very interesting, very challenging. Also, don't put the Ultima into first gear through there. It's not a go. Pretty much, yeah, you put it into first gear and it will just spin the car. The curbs here are horrible as well, especially this final turn. Dip a wheel over the curb on the outside, and there is a very good possibility of you spinning and having a huge accident. It's a challenging circuit. It's a very demanding circuit, Lime Rock, and that's why I do quite like it for testing cars, even though I'm not massively experienced around it. Each vehicle was going to be given 6 laps to go as quickly as possible. The Ultima's benchmark time was a 56.2. That was the time that other cars that I was going to build would have to try and beat. In all honesty, the Ultima was pretty good around here. You could get a little bit of oversteer here and there if you were a little bit uncareful. On the most part, though, the power delivery, the traction you got from this car is where its strong point is. There is so much power from this car, but you can boot it out of almost every corner, and it finds grip, and that is very, very impressive from the Ultima, because that is the sort of thing that these cars are going to have to compete with. The first vehicle that I built was an 88 BMW M5. Now, I chose this car, well, first of all, it's not that expensive to buy, only 19,000 credits, and you can get a pretty big engine in it, 3.2 litre i6, that will, when fully modified, give the car 963 horsepower. So we have got more power in the BMW than we had in the Ultima. There's 680 foot-pounds of torque, and the car only weighs 2,600 pounds, so yes, it is heavier than the Ultima, but there is a lot more power. The total cost of the build of this car as well, 115,000 credits, so it ticks the category of being cheaper than the Ultima. The question was, could it lap Lime Rock as quick? The answer, simply no. No, the BMW couldn't. Its lap time was a 59.8. I didn't really like this car, I will be honest. A couple of things gave it a lot of problems. First of all, the suspension. This car has race suspension. It's pretty much fully built. There wasn't... For 130,000 credits, and even with the cost of the engine and so on, I could put pretty much every upgrade on this vehicle. And even with race suspension, you can kind of see the car, it bounces and moves around a lot. It wasn't very nice to drive, certainly over the odd bump and so on around here. The BMW, it didn't drive particularly well. Also, trying to put the power down was nowhere near as nice in this as it was in the Ultima. So BMW didn't really work. The next car to have a go, the Gen 2 Mazda MX-5, of course, as you can hear, it certainly doesn't have the standard engine. Nope. This one has the quad rotor. I had to have a go with the quad rotor in something, so the MX-5 seemed like a sensible choice. The engine itself may well cost 60,000 credits, so that's a lot of your budget gone. Already almost half your budget gone on the engine alone, but the car is only 17,000. And overall, the total cost of the build, 117,000 for the Mazda, a little bit more expensive than the BMW. The reason why you can still keep the price down, of course, is the engine. While the engine swap itself is very expensive, to upgrade the engine is only take off the restrictors, and that's only like 1,000 and a bit. So yeah, overall the price is still kept down in the Mazda, and I'd hoped that it would be a nice car to drive. The thing is, putting this much power in an MX-5, it does slightly ruin the balance of the car. You saw on that first lap how much I was fighting and struggling with the car. There simply isn't the grip in the MX-5. It's worse than the BMW when it comes to trying to put that power down. You have to wait so long to use any of the power. So its lap time, well, it was a 58.9. Still quite a way off the Ultima. A little quicker than the BMW, yes. It does handle better through the turns. Suspension is far, far better. You don't get chucked about by the bumps. You're not being thrown around so much. However, it's the power delivery is where it struggles so much. Trying to use the 800 horsepower that you get from the quad rotor in this, it just can't do it. It is almost as light as the Ultima. This one is about 100 pounds heavier. You just cannot use the power. You're having to wait so long before you can get on the power in this car, whereas the Ultima, you get around the corner and boot it and it goes. If you do that in this, you will just get wheel spin and be going incredibly sideways. So the MX-5 couldn't do it. I figured my best bet to beat the Ultima was to go with something American. The reason being behind these, there are three reasons. First of all, you can get quite a lot of cheap cars, like this Viper GTS ACR. It only costs 48,000 credits to buy in the first place, and you get a pretty damn decent car to begin with. You don't have to be spending money on engine swaps. I did try to build the likes of the Lotus Esprit. I tried to put the V12 in it, but the problem is that the engines are costing so much money for that to get the sort of power required that I couldn't get the Esprit to a sort of a suitable level, whereas the Viper, you don't have to worry about swapping engines. So again, this is pretty much a fully built Viper. This one that we're taking around 970 horsepower, 924 foot-pounds of torque. Admittedly, it is heavy again at 3,000 pounds. It's almost, 800 pounds heavier than the Ultima, but there is an awful lot of power. The other reason why the American cars are a pretty good shout is the tyres. You can get some massive, massive tyres on these vehicles. I think it's 345s on the back of the Viper, which means traction is very, very good. You get the sort of traction that you get from the Ultima in this car. You can throw it around a corner, boot it out the other side, and the Viper will be fine. The Viper went quicker. It did a 57.0, so only 0.8 of a second slower than the Ultima. Certainly not too bad at all around this circuit. I really like the way the Viper drove. It didn't quite have the acceleration of the Ultima, but it was a very nice, very stable car to race. Perhaps the best bet I had, though, was with the Shelby GT350R. Yes, the car that I named second best value for money seemed like a good choice to try and beat the Ultima at just 55,000 credits from standard. This is a phenomenal value for money car. And the best thing about it is I loved the way this car drove. It drove pretty much perfectly for my driving style. So I reckoned I would stand a good shout using this. Don't have to worry about swapping the engine. With the standard engine in this car, I got it to 1,076 horsepower, 860 foot-pounds of torque at a similar weight to the Viper, around the 3,000 pound mark. So there is ridiculous power, plenty of torque in this car, and it still handles pretty well. Admittedly, putting all of this power and so on does ruin it slightly. It is a difficult car. All of these cars can be quite difficult to drive, but if you are a little bit careful with the Ford, you can certainly get it around a track very, very quickly. Its lap time, a 56.6. So we got it down to, we're only talking 0.4 of a second between this and the Ultima around a real tough handling track. That's pretty good going. Cost of the car altogether, again, another pretty much fully built. All of these cars here are pretty much fully built. The Shelby came to 125,000 credits. So you got 5,000 credits to spare. The difference between this and the Ultima, yeah, the Shelby was really quite impressive, although, as with all of these, you did have to be a little bit careful. The thing is, I didn't just want a car to be able to keep up with the Ultima around the track. I wanted a car that could keep up with it in a straight line, so it was for a drag race down the Le Mans straight. BMW went first, and despite a good initial launch, it didn't really stand much chance against the GTR. Even with a little bit of cheating by me of going to sit in the slipstream behind the Ultima, BMW. It just simply couldn't compete with the straight line speed of that Ultima. It gets up to its 230 mile an hour top speed too quickly. Admittedly, towards the very end of the straight, BMW did start hitting the limiter, which is less than ideal, but it didn't stand a hope. The Ultima just pulled away so quickly. So BMW failed. Next attempt was with the Mazda, and despite being a sort of similar weight to the Ultima, similar power and so on, the traction is the problem. As I said, when it came to racing around Lime Rock, the traction in the MX-5 just lets it down. You saw how much the car was squirming as I tried to set off there. You simply cannot put the power down as well in this car as the Ultima. Through the mid-stage of this race, they are fairly even, but again, the Mazda runs out of speed and the Ultima continues to pull away. It's the initial launch, the traction from the MX-5 is just not good enough. You cannot set off with anywhere near the same amount of speed, a little bit closer than with the BMW, but again, the Ultima absolutely walked it. So the bigger challenges came up next. The Viper. Well, the Viper got off the line much, much better, as you would expect from the car. And over a quarter of a mile drag race, the Viper could probably take it. But much more than that, and the speed of the Ultima kicks in. Yeah, the Viper has the phenomenal traction off the line. And again, all of these cars here were being run with completely standard setups. The Viper did have quite long gear ratios. Perhaps that helps a little bit, though, with the likes of setting off and so on. Yeah, the Viper kept up okay, but again, I'm ducking in the slipstream here, and I still the Ultima is pulling away. The initial launch, the Viper would keep up, and I mean, it's not that far off. I mean, we are travelling at 220, 230 miles an hour now, so the gap between these two is not very much at all. The Ultima stays within shot just about the entire way down. Both cars make the turn without any problems. But the Viper couldn't beat it. So again, it was to the Shelby as our best bet of beating the Ultima off the line. Similar story as we had with the MX-5. The Shelby just cannot quite put its power down. However, once you've stopped spinning the wheels, once we get past 100 miles an hour or so, the Shelby starts reeling the Ultima back in, and it goes up. It goes up to pretty much side by side, at which point both cars even out in speed. We are, both of us drivers, absolutely flat out. There is nothing more we can do at this point, and we are absolutely side by side. There is just nothing to separate the cars. The Ultima gets the better launch, and over a quarter of a mile, the Ultima would win. But the Shelby starts reeling it back in, and it reels it back in just at the point where they both equalise in speed. We're just side by side. It's side by side through the kink at the end of the straight. Admittedly, I do lose a little bit of ground being stuck on the outside there, but a complete dead heat between these cars down the Mont straight. That is quite impressive from the Shelby. So yeah, so very, very similar lap time to the Ultima around Lime Rock. Pretty much identical down the Le Mans straight. So to finish it up, we would go for a race between the pair of them at a track that should be an interesting one, actually. We went for the Daytona infield. Reason being is there are some nice long straights for the Shelby to enjoy. However, the actual circuit itself is quite a mean one. It's quite a narrow one and quite twisty in places, so a good sort of all-round testing for the vehicles. The first few corners, the Ultima would get the much better start, as you would imagine, and managed to go around the outside of me at turn 1. I proceeded to try a little bit further down, and it didn't quite work. It's the traction of the Ultima you see out of the corners, where it can make up its time, even running a little bit wide through here. I can't really do anything. I'm sort of sniffing around. Can I get around the outside? Probably not. And then we've got another one of these traction zones that the Ultima can just pull that gap out. So I'm never quite close enough to really have a big dive. The Ultima, struggling a little bit, runs a bit wide as I'm continuing to try and have a look, see if I can get my car underneath him somewhere. But every time we come to leave a corner, the Ultima has just got that acceleration. It can put its power down, whereas the Mustang will be sat there spinning his wheels. However, as we come onto this, we come back onto the oval, this is where the advantage of the Shelby really, really comes in. You see, the corner coming onto this section it's a relatively slow-speed corner, but unlike when you're setting off from the standstill, you don't spend too much time spinning the wheels of the Shelby, so you don't lose as much time to the Ultima, and the Mustang really will close up to the back of the car. Admittedly, yes, I am a little bit in the slipstream down here on this turn, but even without it, the Shelby is far faster through that section. Turn 1, this lap around, the Ultima may have outbraked braked himself a little bit. I tried to get on the power a little bit too soon, and went very, very sideways, which is an easy thing to do. If you are not careful with the Shelby, yeah, it's very easy to get this thing sideways. But the same can be said with the Ultima as well. And the battle continued. The battle continued for a good number of laps. I will be honest, I am slightly more experienced with the game than the driver of the Ultima. I have perhaps a small advantage in sort of familiarity with the game. But yeah, the race was absolutely fantastic fun. I spotted a gap. The Ultima was a little bit wide, got a bit of wheel spin, and I saw a gap I could fire my Shelby through. And now we will see what I mean about the straight line speed of this Ford. The Ultima is sat in the slipstream and got a similar run onto this back straight as me, and he falls back. We're not talking very big margins here. However, the Ultima could do nothing about the Shelby. Even sat in the slipstream, the Mustang would pull away from the Ultima around here, which makes it quite difficult for the Ultima, because it doesn't matter if he can overtake me through this part of the lap, as he promptly will when I get it all wrong into turn one, because if I'm close enough come the back straight, I will simply breeze past him. This was a section that I was having trouble with, where the Ultima made up most of his lap time was on the run down towards this sort of turn two bit. I couldn't attack the curbs. If I hit the curbs, it would want to make the Mustang go sideways, whereas the Ultima could be flat out, attack the curbs all he liked, and wouldn't have a problem over that section. We were continuing to scrap. I was trying to hold position. I just ran a little bit wide, got a wheel on the grass, and that upset the Mustang massively. And sure enough, the Ultima found the gap, and I was stuck trying to go around the outside, and there's not really going to be much space there to make that one work. And this was just how the race would pan out. I'm continuing to look for a way past, but it didn't really matter if the Ultima got back past me, because I was now well within range as we came to the straight, and the Mustang would just simply keep reeling the Ultima in, and then he'd get me back through sort of the second corner, and we would continue with the squabbling. If I could break the chain, if I could keep ahead of him into turn two, I could probably keep ahead of the Ultima and pull away. Equally, if the Ultima wasn't having to defend from me, he could probably be setting lap times. The thing is, when you're battling like this, the Ultima's having to take slightly funny lines to defend, to try and keep the Mustang behind. I'm having to take slightly funny lines to try and attack and so on at places. So yeah, it's not necessarily helping. We are certainly slowing each other down to an extent. Again, you see, we came onto onto the oval here side by side. The Ultima could duck in the slipstream immediately as soon as I got past, and still could not keep up with the Mustang. Yeah, the straight line speed around this bank section was really very, very impressive from the Shelby. As we break it down into turn one, the brakes on the Ultima were a little bit better, shall we say, between the two cars. Shelby did very, very well under braking though, despite being much, much heavier. But again, you see the struggles I'm having across the curb. I get my car up onto two wheels, and I know the Ultima's up the inside. I have no choice but to leave him some space there. I tried my best to hold it around the outside, but a little bit too much wheel spin, and the Ultima kept the position, and I was still trying to look. I could never quite break the chain through the first couple of corners, and then equally the Ultima could never break the chain through here, could never get far enough ahead of me to be safe when we came onto the banked section. Yeah, you see him having to defend through these corners. He's got to be ahead of me. He's got to try and compromise me almost with my run through here if he is going to stand a chance. But neither of us could really do anything to properly keep our cars ahead. It was an absolutely phenomenal race. Had an awful lot of fun. But as we come on to the back straight, you see the speed of the Shelby, especially if I've got slipstream. I will cruise up to the back of the Ultima. I go for the high line around the banking. Unfortunately, the Ultima, the driver, may have glanced across to see where I was. Didn't quite realise he was as low. We're not quite used to driving on ovals yet on Forza. Ran a little bit too much on the apron, unsettled the car, and that was the end of that for the Ultima. Yeah, to go for quite a number of spins down there. Yeah, I mean, between the two cars, there was very, very little to pick. It was an awful lot of fun. The Shelby was a little bit awkward at times to drive. Certainly not quite as composed across the bumps as you get from the Ultima. Although, yeah, the straight line speed of the Shelby was mighty, mighty impressive. So, as far as conclusions go, well, you can definitely go as quick as the Ultima for less money. The Shelby proved that 5,000 less credits for the Shelby, and it pretty much kept up with the Ultima with whichever task it was set. I mean, 0.4 of a second around Lime Rock is not very much of a difference between the two cars down the Le Mans straight from a standing start. The Ultima has the traction, whereas the Mustang will pull it in further down, so they end up at a dead heat. They'll have pretty much the same top speed. From a rolling start mind, I have no doubt that the Shelby would have beaten the Ultima down the Le Mans straight. And at Daytona, well, it was so evenly matched. Neither of us could properly see off the other one. We spent most of the time arguing over positions and completely compromising our lines and so on. Both cars could have gone far faster around there if we weren't actually racing one another. So yeah, the Shelby is pretty much on par with the Ultima. The Ultima, perhaps the slightly better handling car, but the second we get near a straight, the Shelby has the straight line speed to reel it back in, and the Shelby is not bad at all. Not bad at all when it comes to the corners. So yeah, you can go as quick as the Ultima. Going faster though is very, very difficult, and let's face it, going faster than it with a road car in general is going to be very, very difficult. I have no doubt if you got something like a Caterham or a Lotus 211, you could make it go faster around a tight, twisty track. For the money, though, you're still going to be limited because those cars are a lot more expensive to buy, and you are never going to have a hope in hell of beating the Ultima for straight line speed. Honestly, American cars are probably your best bet simply because of the tyres. You can give them such huge tyres, and they cost relatively little money, and you can get a lot of power out of them without having to start worrying about engine swaps and expensive engine swaps at that. Yeah, the American cars are probably your best bet. The Viper was a lovely car to drive. In all honesty, probably the easiest car to drive here of the lot of them. However, it just doesn't quite have the speed of the Ultima. Give the Viper 100-150 more horsepower, and it'd probably be a different story. But the Viper was maxed out. So yeah, it was a very interesting test. And the Shelby GT350R continues to be a mighty impressive car. Anyway, that is it for this video, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.